Story 1. I went through a bad breakup. Couldn't get the guy to leave me alone. He was showing up at my work, home, even my mum's house. I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I started looking at states hours away from my hometown. Not a city, but not too small of a town either. I wanted to be able to walk the sidewalks and get to local shops. Moving to somewhere I knew no one, it would be nice to live in a neighborly town. I finally settled on a little town in the Pacific Northwest. I flew out to look for a job and a place to live. I spent the first few days walking around the main town, applying at a few shops. I quickly found a smaller book manufacturing company. I had an interview and fit what they were looking for. After that was settled, I set about finding where Cow, my little tuxedo cat, and I would call home. I started exploring a bit farther from the main town. There were some cute, quiet places, but they weren't calling to me. Then I found my new little neighborhood, Jerusalem Street. It was settled just a bit back from the main road, 3 rows of townhouses in a cul-de-sac. You could tell they had some age, but all were well kept, and it was a lovely little street. Not the near-identical wash of beige and grey have become so common. Most were light pastels. It looked like people liked living here. Lots of trees and gentle light dappling the ground underneath. Quiet. A couple of people out with their dogs or walking to town. A small area in the centre with a bird feeder, a bench, and board that people could leave flyers or notes on. It looked like the people took pride in making a community. In the row at the back of the cul-de-sac was an empty lavender home with simple "for rent" sign out front. I spoke to the realtor in town, and everything was taken care of. Luckily, the owners left some basic furniture, so I didn't have to worry about anything too big. I flew back home, packed up my important stuff, and drove across the country with Cow buckled into the passenger seat. Of course, I had to stop and rest for a couple of nights on the way, let Cow out of his carrier and stretch in a hotel room for the night. I timed our arrival for late morning so I would have a large part of the day to unpack and not disturb my new neighbors by getting there too early. Several people stopped by to welcome me as I was going back and forth from the car. An older woman with blue hair and eccentric dress introduced herself as Miss Jules, said they had a welcoming committee. She was one that started it as she lived here most of her life. The neighborhood had a couple rules, but nothing too bad or anything like an HOA. They would be by around dinner time, when you really should be taking break anyway, she told me. She was nice. I told her I would be ready, and she said she hoped Cow would come out to see her. I smiled. I spent the next couple of hours getting everything out of the car so I could let Cow into the rest of the house to explore, and I could get a shower before the welcoming committee showed up. Around 5:30, there was a knock at my door, and I saw Ms. Jules with a couple of other people. I welcomed them in. Ms. Jules introduced me to Dave Hancock, the middle-aged neighbor directly beside me, and Kayla, a woman around my age who lived in the row of houses to my right. Ms. Jules had brought some sandwiches and bags of assorted chips. We sat around my table where I had managed to clear most of my stuff off. She commented that I had done well for one day of work. We sat around eating and making small talk. Kayla seemed shy, but told me she would be happy to show me around town if I wanted to stay. I'm sure I'll take you up on that, but what do you mean if I want to stay? Kayla nervously looked at Ms. Jules. She smiled warmly at me. We may as well get to the neighborhood rules. It's really not much to worry about. Can I have that paperwork, please? Dave opened a folder with some papers in it. There was a town map, a small pamphlet about the community center, and a printed list about our little street. Miss Jules pushed them toward me. You can read those at your leisure, but I do need to go over some things with you tonight. Okay, no problem, I stammered a little. The street cleaner comes once a month, in the afternoon on the first Tuesday of the month. You'll want any cars in the driveway or to be out at that time. I'm sure you saw the board in the middle by the bench. You can find information about town events, people trying to rehome some things, or even some snacks for people to take. We all vote at the community center when it's that time of year. This is all written down for you. You can come to any of us here if you have questions or need anything, but now you know where the 3 of us live. Thank you. I'll be sure to leave some cookies out for everyone once I'm settled in. I didn't say more. It felt like she wasn't done going over things. There was a bit of tension in the air. Cow cautiously peeked around the corner to see what was going on. Hello, dear. How do you like your new home? She held her hand down to him. He slowly approached and sniffed her for a minute before rubbing against her hand. He must smell Emily. She's my tortie. Cute, I smiled. I'd like to meet her sometime. Absolutely. She paused before continuing. This is an old town. Not much has changed in a long time. It's had slow growth. and many natural areas have been maintained for centuries. The trees behind our street are the edge of a state park. Wow, that's awesome. Kayla, I'd explore with you sometime if that's something you like too. I'd love to, Kayla responded. I don't have a hiking buddy. Before I could say more, Miss, Jules continued, I'll finish up so you can get some rest tonight. There's just one more rule we all follow here. Her face looked older than it had a minute ago, makeup crowding in the gentle creases of her face. She looked into my eyes. Don't look outside if you hear any noises at night. It's not all night, just between 1 and 3. Don't go out at that time. If you do get caught out at that time, there's Ashley Street just down the main road. You saw that, right? Park there for the night. Many of us have had to sit in our cars for a couple of hours over the years. This is a small enough town that neighborhood knows it's just us and won't get worried by a car there early in the morning. I didn't know what to think. My mind tried to come up with a logical reason. Do animals come in from the park? Something does, she said quietly. It's been at least as long as I have. As long as you don't look out, there's nothing to worry about. And don't worry about Cow. He'll be fine. I keep Emily inside just to be safe. It's not every night, but you're better off just not looking out at that time at all. I know this is a lot to take in, but please just listen to it. Any of our community would talk if you have any questions. We'll leave you be for night. I'll check in soon. With that, she stood up from the table and the others followed. Kayla waved goodbye. Miss Jules' blue hair shone under the streetlight until she made it to her door. Dave stood around another moment as we watched them go. I know that all sounds pretty weird. The people that lived here before couldn't handle it, and they left. My phone number is with the paperwork if you need anything, or if you really need something overnight. Just bang on the wall and I'll hear. I'll be over at 3:01. Good night. Thank you, good night. I headed back inside, head pounding. I sat heavily on the couch and tried to absorb what I had just heard. Miss Jules looked serious, and she had been so nice. I felt bad doubting her. What was the harm in listening to her? I was normally sleeping at that time anyway, and she said Cow was safe. If they all were, being honest, I didn't want to find out. I would just stay inside and not go looking. Cow decided he was ready for bed, and I followed. It had been a long day. I fell asleep hard and didn't wake up until sunlight was streaming through my window, Cow crying to be fed. I dragged myself out of bed as my thoughts drifted to the previous night. Maybe there was nothing. I hadn't woken up at all. And Cow was acting normally. He was fine anywhere as long as he was getting food. I got him fed and looked out my front window. Miss Jules was sitting on the bench, glancing back at my house. I got dressed and headed out to see her. Oh, good. How was your first night? She stood up and took my hand. Slept like a log. I didn't wake up until Cow demanded breakfast. She nodded. I'm sorry I had to spring that on you last night, but it really has to be done right way. A few people started their mornings, smiling or nodding to us. They all looked a little relieved. So, it really is true then. I'll be honest, I was half thinking I dreamt that. Unfortunately, yes, it's how I lost my husband and our son. I didn't want to scare you too much last night. I don't have to tell you the details. I stared blankly for a few seconds. I'm so sorry. It's okay. Honey, it's been a long time. It's just a little bit easier than it used to be. I know they wouldn't want me to spend every day sad over them. Can I ask what happened? What happens if you look? I asked, wincing a little and hoping I didn't sound too insensitive. Are you sure? I thought another moment. I would rather know than let the curiosity get to me. She sat back down. We had heard the rules when we moved in together right out of school. My husband Charles and me. People had doubts about us, but we were meant to be from the day we met. When our son Joe was born, we decided we would lock him in his room for the night. We gave him the one without windows to be safe. Joe was getting a little older, and we hadn't locked his room at night anymore. I guess one day he got curious or didn't believe us. We heard a scream and ran to his room. Joe wasn't there. Before I could react, Charles pushed me in and locked the door. I heard him run out and then just silence. The neighbors saw what happened in the morning and rushed to the house. They found me locked inside. There was really nothing left of them. Chunks strewn across the lawn, everywhere. Blood soaked into the grass. They were buried together. Just pieces. There was no way to tell who was who. That's all any of us know. Holy shit, I whispered. I could feel the bile heating up my stomach, threatening to come up my throat. I'm so sorry. I don't know what else to say. I'll never get the sight out of my mind, so I try hard to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. You really will be okay if you don't look. I should go tend to my Emily. I walked her home and gave her a hug. I went back inside and collapsed against the door. Cow came to see what was wrong, and I scooped him up and cried. What the fuck? How was this real? I told myself again that that was the middle of the night. Just stay asleep. Stay in bed. My house was perfect. My neighbors were lovely. Just don't look for any sounds at night. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, listlessly organizing my belongings. Cow screamed at me, and I just about jumped out of my skin. He just wanted dinner. Heart pounding and hands shaking, I got him taken care of to stop his yelling. I sat at the table and slid the bottle of whiskey over towards me. Just as I was going to take swig out of the bottle, there was a knock at the door. I was tired but got up to check. There was a swath of black hair. It was Kayla. "Hi, Ms. Jules said she talked to you. I wanted to see how you were holding up." She smiled weakly at me. I stood to the side. "Do you want to come in? I was just going to have a drink." She stepped. "Thanks." Now that I had company, I grabbed 2 glasses and a couple cans of Coke. I guess you would have heard her story too. "How long have you lived here?" I inquired. "Yeah, just a bit over a year." "Have you seen anything?" "No, I've never dared look. No one else has looked since I've been here. The people who lived here before finally heard the noises and they left." She was pregnant. I think that's a big reason they didn't want to stay. "So, you have heard things?" "Not a lot. I started sleeping with earbuds pretty quickly. I didn't need to hear more." I looked at her, hoping she would go on, but didn't want to pressure her. She continued, "The first time I just heard something walking around. It was quiet, but I could hear it rustling leaves as it went. I told myself it had just been an animal. We do live against the woods. A couple nights later, I heard it walking again. I had blinds drawn, but I still didn't even want to look in that direction. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. The movement stopped. I heard the faintest scratch, then knocking on the window, like someone tapping with just a fingernail. I found some faint footprints in the morning." She paused to take a drink. "They were bigger than I expected. They almost looked like a deer mixed with a human. Almost like there was a heel, but then they turned cloven. I moved my bed upstairs that day and started sleeping with the earbuds that night. It helps. I really recommend it." "Thanks for the drink," she said, finishing it. "I should go get settled for the night, and let me know when you've had time to unpack and we can do some hiking during the day." "Of course, and thanks for the tip." The next couple of weeks I continued to put everything in their new places and started my new job. I was getting the hang of it. Things started to feel a little normal. Kayla and I had started hiking on Saturday or Sunday mornings, still well after the sun had risen. I hadn't heard anything at night. I never forgot to close the blinds, but I did start to forget about the noises. Nearly a month after I moved in, I heard walking through neighborhood. I had seen deer a couple times, coming around dusk to drink at a couple bird baths around the street. They were back, that's all it was. Still, I was glad I listened to Kayla's story and put my bedroom on the 2nd floor. I about shit myself when I heard the tapping on my window. I whisper called for Cow. He sat up from the end of the bed. My heart sank into my stomach. The tapping continued. I reached for my phone. It was after 2:45. This should be over soon. I didn't want to disturb him, but I felt like I had to talk to someone. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to retype the message about 4 times. "Hi Dave, sorry to bother you so early, I just can't sleep." I jumped as the tapping started to get more aggressive. My phone went off. "It's no problem, don't worry, it'll be over soon. Just a few minutes and then it's over for the night. It's never gotten in, just don't look. Let me know if you need me to come over after or tomorrow." 2:55, so close. "Okay, 5 minutes, I can do that. Thank you, I think I'll get shades. The blinds aren't good enough." "Dave, that's a good idea. Tell Cow hi for me." I sat for another couple minutes and then the tapping stopped all at once. There was no rustling of something moving away, just silence. I pulled a slightly disgruntled Cow up closer to me. Anxiety through the roof. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Dave caught me in this morning. "You did well." That was worse than it normally is. I could hear it from mine. "Let me know if you need help with the blinds." He waved and was on his way before I could respond. He liked talking about these things even less than the others. Couldn't blame him. I stopped to get blinds after work and didn't forget to put my earbuds in again. Things continued as they had. Work, hike, play with Cow. I was making enough at my new job to be fine, but I had spent most of my savings to suddenly move. I stopped at the local bar and started taking some shifts Friday nights, Saturdays or Sundays. This was a smaller town, so even with a later shift, I still had about half an hour by the time I got home to get inside safely. I was busy and tired, but it would be worth it. I would feel better having savings again, but I was just getting so tired. Finally, last Friday night I was exhausted, that type of bone tired that sinks into your bones. so drained that a minor inconvenience could make you start crying. I worked every day for 3 weeks. I got home after my bar shift, 12:35. All I had to do was drag my tired butt in the house and pass out for the night. The next thing I remember is how uncomfortable I felt. My eyes snapped open. Fuck. I fell asleep. How long had it been? I'd only just got home. Right? I was in my own driveway with plenty of time to get in. I looked at my phone, 2:24. Fuck me. I heard something right by me. Before I could stop myself, I was looking over. All I saw were fingertips, just barely placed onto my driver's side window. The rest of the hand was obscured by the door. Then there was movement. What seemed to be branches started to move. They were turning towards my car, one gnarled point making contact with my window and scraping along it. I slammed my eyes shut. One hand desperately pulled my hood over my head, and the other covered my mouth, willing my breathing to get under control and not have a full-blown panic attack right now. I hadn't really seen anything, right? It didn't see me look. All I saw was fingertips. It could have been a normal person who got lost and ended up here. After all, the noises didn't come every night. Those weren't antlers. It was a trick of the darkness. Then what made the shrill scraping coming from right outside? And those were fingertips, but they were too long and rough, worn and cracked and dirty. I curled in my seat, trying not to scream, eyes squeezed shut. Antlers like bark, but hard enough to damage the metal burned into my mind. A slap. I bit into my lip hard enough to bleed, but didn't scream. It sounded like a hand slamming into my door beside the other fingertips. I could hear heavy breathing. My chest ached. It felt like my heart would give out before anything else had a chance to happen. My stomach lurched as my car rocked hard. Tears and snot soaked my hoodie. Another slam on the car and it rocked again. It felt like if it hit any harder, the glass would break. What were the rules here? Could it get in? It really seemed to be trying. A different slam echoed through my bones. The sick sound was like a head against glass, antlers scratching on the metal frame above. It slammed its head again. There was nothing I could do. Again. It wasn't in yet, and I figured my best bet was to stay down and keep my eyes shut. Again. The car rocked, gentler this time, and the slamming stopped. I couldn't open my eyes. I didn't think it was long enough. It couldn't be 3 o'clock yet, but it was so hard to tell. Minutes felt like hours, time dripping by like cold molasses. How long had it stopped to stare in at me before its assault? I could hear it walking around, pacing around the car. It started to fade out. Then I heard hooves on pavement. Metal squealed and glass cracked. I screamed. Dead silence. I continued to lay curled on my side. Nothing more came. I heard Miss Jules calling me and running. I still didn't dare open my eyes. It took a few minutes of convincing, but I finally held my phone up and looked. 3:12. I started uncontrollably sobbing. Fear and relief racked my body and I laid there shaking badly, stomach in knots. I was eventually able to unlock my door. Ms. Jules ripped it open and held me in her arms. We cried together. That was nearly a month ago. I thought I'd leave that day, but I'm still here. Where else would I go? I have kind, caring neighbors. My home is nice. I talk with Miss Jules. Dave checks in on me. I hike with Kayla. I hold Cow close. I did quit working at the bar that day. I'll never go out at night again. I sleep with earbuds and a white noise machine. My bedroom windows are shuttered tight from the inside as soon as it starts to get dark. Story 2. I don't know who else to tell or what I even expect to happen by posting this. I can't call anyone. He's always around. I'm writing this on my phone, huddled in my closet, hoping the sound of the old house settling will cover the frantic tapping of my thumbs. I feel like a little kid again, hiding from monsters. The difference is, this time, the monster thinks it's my dad. Let me back up. I'm 23. I live with my father. It wasn't the plan, obviously. College, job, my own place, that was the plan. But the economy is what it is, and my mum passed a few years back, and he was getting on in years. He's retired, and his pension is just enough to keep the lights on in this old house. It wasn't a bad arrangement. I'd work my shifts at a warehouse downtown, help with bills, and he'd potter around, watch his old movies, and complain about his back. We had a rhythm. It was quiet, maybe a little lonely, but it was normal. The change was so gradual I almost didn't notice it. At first it was just nice. My dad, who for the last 5 years had mostly treated the armchair in front of the TV as a natural extension of his body, started moving again. He was always a big guy, a former mechanic, and age had settled on him like a thick layer of dust. But suddenly, the dust was gone. It started about a month ago. He went down to the basement to fix a leaking pipe. I'd offered to do it, but he insisted. Still got some use in these old hands, he'd grumbled, a familiar refrain. He was down there for hours. I remember calling down once, asking if he needed help, and just getting a muffled "got it handled" in response. When he finally came up, he was smudged with dirt and grime, but he was grinning, a real toothy grin, wider than I'd seen in a decade. "All sorted," he announced, clapping his dusty hands together. He looked invigorated. I just figured he was proud of himself for handling the repair. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and the sound of birds chirping outside. That wasn't unusual. The unusual part was my dad, standing at the stove, humming. He hadn't cooked a proper breakfast since my mum died. He'd usually just pour himself a bowl of cereal and grunt a good morning. "Morning, son," he said, his voice bright. "Eggs?" I was surprised, but pleased. "Yeah, sure. Thanks. You're in a good mood." "Feeling spry?" When he said, flipping the eggs with a flourish that almost sent one to the floor. "Decided I'd been sitting around too long. Life's for living, right?" That week he was a whirlwind of activity. He mowed the lawn, which I usually had to nag him about for days. He cleaned the gutters. He even started oiling the hinges on the doors so they wouldn't creak. I was thrilled. I thought maybe he'd finally pulled himself out of the long, quiet grief he'd been swimming in. I thought I was getting my old dad back. The first hint that something was wrong came a week later. I was getting ready to go out with some friends. It was a Friday night, the first I'd had off in a while. I was putting on my jacket when he came into the living room, wringing his hands. "You're going out?" he asked. His voice had lost its cheerful edge. It was tight. "Yeah, just for a few hours. Grabbing a beer with a couple of guys from work." He winced and put a hand on his chest. "Oh, it's just, I'm feeling a bit funny. My chest is tight, probably just indigestion. But, you know." I stopped, my keys halfway to my pocket. His face was pale. I felt a surge of guilt. "Are you okay? Should I call someone?" No, nothing like that," he said quickly, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm sure it'll pass. I wouldn't want to be here alone if it gets worse." So I stayed. I took my jacket off, ordered a pizza, and we watched one of his old black and white westerns. His chest pain seemed to magically disappear the moment I sat down on the couch. I was annoyed, but I told myself he was just getting old and anxious. The next time I tried to leave, a few days later, it was his back. He claimed it had seized up so badly he couldn't get off the sofa to get a glass of water. I spent the evening fetching things for him, rubbing his shoulders and listening to him groan. The moment my friend called to ask where I was and I said I couldn't make it, he suddenly felt a little bit better and managed to get up to use the bathroom on his own. It became a pattern. Every single time I made a plan to leave the house, for any reason other than my work shifts, he would develop some sudden, debilitating ailment. A migraine, dizziness, a stomach bug. It was so transparently manipulative that I got angry. We had a fight about it. "I can't be your prisoner," I yelled one afternoon after he'd faked a coughing fit to stop me from going to the grocery store. "I need to have a life." His face crumpled, not with anger, but with a deep, profound sadness that completely disarmed me. "I just need you here," he whispered. "Is that so much to ask? I get lonely." What could I say to that? I felt like the world's biggest jerk. I stayed home, again. But the active, energetic dad was still there. In between his sudden episodes, he was a dynamo. He repainted the porch. He fixed the wobbly fence in the backyard. He was up at dawn, gardening with a fervor I'd never seen. He was stronger, faster. He'd carry in all the groceries in one trip, bags hanging off his arms, without even breathing heavily. My dad, who used to get winded walking up the stairs. It was a contradiction I couldn't reconcile. The real fear, the kind that crawls up your spine and lives in the back of your throat, started with the sun. We were in the backyard. He'd been weeding the flower beds my mum had planted years ago, and I was sitting on the steps, scrolling through my phone. It was a bright, cloudless afternoon. The sun was beating down, casting long, sharp shadows across the lawn. I noticed my own shadow, a dark, stretched-out silhouette of a man slouched over a phone. I looked at him, on his knees in the dirt, and I saw the shadow of the rose bush, the shadow of the fence, the shadow of the bird bath, but not his. He was a solid figure in the blazing sunlight, but the ground around him was unbroken, pure, bright green. There was no shadow. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. It had to be a trick of the light, an optical illusion. I looked away, then looked back. Still nothing. A perfect, shadowless man in a world full of shadows. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Hey, Dad," I said, my voice sounding thin and strange to my own ears. "Can you give me a hand with this?" I pointed to a heavy terracotta pot on the other side of the patio, a spot in direct, unforgiving sunlight. He looked up, and for a second, I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of panic. He shielded his face from the sun with his hand, even though he was already squinting. "In a minute, son. Just want to finish this patch." He never came over. He stayed in the garden, and as the sun began to set, he seemed to follow the receding line of the house's shadow, always keeping himself just inside it. From that day on, I became obsessed. I watched him constantly. I noticed how he never stood by the windows during the day, how he'd find an excuse to move if a ray of sunlight fell across him in the living room, how he always took his walks in the evening after the sun had dipped below the horizon. He was always drawn to the shade, to the dim corners of the house. My worry curdled into dread. The excuses to keep me home became more frantic. Last week he unplugged my car battery and then feigned ignorance. A couple of days ago I woke up to find he'd accidentally locked the front door and lost the key, trapping us both inside until he miraculously found it that evening. I tried talking to him. I sat him down in the dim light of the living room 2 nights ago. "Dad, we need to talk," I started, my heart pounding. "You're not acting like yourself. You're different, and you're keeping me here. I'm worried about you." He just stared at me, his face a calm, placid mask. The energetic, smiling man was gone, replaced by something still and watchful. "I'm fine, son. Never been better, and I'm not keeping you here. I just like having you around. A father can't like having his son around." "It's more than that," I insisted, my voice trembling. "Ever since you went down to the basement to fix that pipe, you've been different. Something happened down there, didn't it?" His face didn't change, but his eyes hardened. It was like watching shutters close over a window. "Don't be ridiculous. I fixed a pipe, that's all. Now drop it." The finality in his tone was absolute. There was no arguing. The conversation was over. That was when I knew. I knew with a certainty that made me feel sick to my stomach. The truth of what had happened was in the basement. I waited until last night. I pretended to go to sleep at my usual time, lying in bed with my eyes wide open, listening to the sounds of the house. I heard him moving around downstairs, the soft, almost silent footsteps that were another new development. My old dad used to stomp around like an elephant. I heard him check the lock on the front door, then the back. I heard him walk past my bedroom door, pausing for a long moment, and I held my breath, my entire body rigid with fear. Then the footsteps receded, and I heard his own bedroom door click shut. I waited for what felt like an eternity, counting the seconds, listening to the old house groan and creak around me. Finally, when I was sure he was asleep, I slipped out of bed. I didn't turn on any lights. I crept down the stairs, my every step a calculated risk. The basement door was at the end of the hall. It was always cold around it. I turned the old brass knob, cringing at the loud click of the latch. I pulled it open and was hit by a wave of cold, damp air that smelled of wet earth and something metallic and vaguely sweet, the smell of decay. My phone was my only light. I switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting a nervous, trembling path down the rickety wooden stairs. I went down, one step at a time, my ears straining for any sound from upstairs. The basement was as I remembered it, concrete floor, stone walls, junk piled in every corner, old furniture under white sheets like sleeping ghosts, boxes of my mum's things, my old toys. The air was thick and heavy. I pointed my light toward the back wall, where the main water line came into the house. That's where he'd been working. I saw his old toolbox lying open on the floor. A pipe wrench was next to it, and the section of copper pipe he'd been working on looked new, clean. He had fixed it, but my eyes were drawn to the floor next to it. Most of the basement floor was concrete, but in this back corner, it was just packed earth, and a large patch of it, maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, was different from the rest. The dirt was darker, looser. It wasn't packed down from decades of existence. It was disturbed, fresh. I stood there for a long moment, the beam of my phone shaking in my hand. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get out of the house, out of the town, to never look back. But I couldn't. I had to know. I found an old garden trowel in a bucket of rusty tools. I knelt down. The earth was soft, just as I'd thought. It gave way easily. I started digging. My breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. The only sounds were the scrape of the trowel against an occasional rock and my own frantic heartbeat pounding in my ears. The smell of damp earth was overwhelming, but underneath it, that other smell was getting stronger. It wasn't a deep hole. Maybe a foot down, my trowel hit something soft, not a rock. I recoiled, dropping the tool. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. I forced myself to reach into the loose soil. I closed my eyes and my fingers brushed against fabric. Denim, the worn, familiar texture of my father's work jeans. I scrambled back, gasping for air, but I knew I had to see. I had to be sure. With tears streaming down my face, I used my hands clawing at the dirt, pulling it away. First a leg, then a torso, wearing his favorite faded flannel shirt, and then the face. It was him, my dad. His eyes were closed, his mouth slightly open. His skin was pale and waxy, and there was a dark, ugly gash on the side of his head, matted with dried blood and dirt. He looked peaceful, in a horrible, final way. He looked like he'd fallen from the stairs, hit his head, and it had all been over in an instant. I stared at his face, the real face of my father, and a sound escaped my throat, a strangled sob of pure horror and grief. He was gone. He'd been gone for a month, lying here in a shallow, unmarked grave, while I'd been living with... The sound came from the top of the stairs. It was a single, soft footstep on the old wood. Slowly, I turned my head. My phone's light followed my gaze, traveling up the dark, rickety staircase. And he was there. He was standing at the top of the stairs, a dark silhouette against the faint light of the hallway. He was just watching me. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes. I was frozen, kneeling in the dirt next to my father's corpse, a cornered animal. He took another step down, then another. He moved with a quiet, fluid grace that my real father had never possessed. The flashlight beam caught his face as he neared the bottom of the stairs. He was wearing my father's pajamas. He had my father's tired, wrinkled eyes. He had my father's graying hair. And he was smiling. It wasn't a malicious smile. It wasn't a triumphant one. It was sad. Infinitely sad, a smile full of a pity that was more terrifying than any rage. "I knew you'd find your way down here eventually," he said. His voice was my father's voice, but without the gravelly, smoke-worn edge. It was smoother, calmer. "I'm sorry you had to see this." I couldn't speak. I could only stare, my mind a screaming void. I scrambled backward away from him, away from the body, until my back hit the cold stone wall. He stopped a few feet away from the shallow grave, looking down at the body with that same mournful expression. "It was an accident," he said softly. "The second to last step. It's rotten." He was carrying the heavy wrench. His balance was off. He fell. He hit his head on the concrete floor right there. It was quick. He didn't suffer. He looked at me, his eyes full of a strange, deep empathy. His last thought, it was for you. He was worried about you, worried you'd be all alone. My voice finally came back, a raw, terrified whisper. What are you?" He tilted his head, a gesture that was so familiar, yet so utterly alien. "I'm him," he said, "and I'm not. You know how every person casts a shadow? A darker, simpler version of themselves that follows them through the light. Think of me as the other shadow, the one that lives on the other side of the veil. We watch. We exist in the shape of our double. We feel what they feel, their joys, their sorrows, their love." He took a step closer and I flinched. He stopped. "That last thought," he continued, his voice barely more than a murmur. "The love he had for you, his fear of leaving you alone, it was so powerful, a life cut short, with so much left to give. It created a space, and it pulled me through. I am his love, his duty, his need to take care of you, given form." He gestured around the basement. "I finished his work. I fixed the pipe. I buried him, so you wouldn't have to. I've been fixing the house. I've been making sure you're safe. I've been trying to be a good father." The words were insane, but in the cold, damp air of that tomb, they felt horribly, undeniably real. "My dad is dead," I choked out, tears blurring my vision. "Yes," the thing in his skin said, and the sadness in its voice felt genuine. "He is. And I am so sorry for your loss. But I am here now." It took another step, and another, until it was standing right over me. It knelt down, so we were at eye level. Its face was inches from mine. I could see every line, every pore of the face I had known my whole life, animated by something I couldn't possibly comprehend. "He loved you more than anything," it whispered, its breath cold, "and so do I. I will never leave you." I will take care of you. We can be a family, just like he wanted, forever. And that's where I am now. He let me go upstairs. He walked behind me the whole way. He's in the living room, watching the television as if nothing happened, as if my real father isn't lying in the dirt downstairs. He's waiting for me. I'm locked in my closet. I know I can't escape. The doors are locked and he is so much stronger than me. He doesn't need to sleep. He'll never get old. He'll never get sick. He'll just be here, taking care of me, forever. I can hear him moving. The soft, quiet footsteps are coming down the hall. He's coming to check on me. He's calling my name. It sounds just like my dad. Story 3. Would it make a good cereal bowl? It may be too shallow for a cereal bowl. An ashtray or a cat bowl would be better. Johnson, you copy? The voice came muffled from the other side of the door. Copy, Bradley. Johnson's static voice came prelude by the trill of a walkie-talkie. I've got a crisp 50 saying this is nothing. The officer on the other side of the door said, Did you find the freezer? Yeah, it's right here. I'm not betting shit. You probably opened it already. You think I'd do that? I got my ass out of bed for this. I want to at least make it interesting, Officer Bradley said. The guy seemed pretty worried when he called in. All right, screw it. 50 if it's anything. Anything at all. All right, I'm getting a good breakfast. Opening in 3, 2, 1. The seal of the freezer door peeled from the door frame. Officer Bradley was a silhouette behind the blinding beam of his flashlight. I couldn't make out the details of his face, but I could imagine. What's it going to be? Johnson asked over the radio. Bradley said nothing. His light started to shake. Come on, who's getting rich? Bradley? Johnson's concern quivered through his joke. Bradley didn't answer the question, but he replied in a quiet voice. I think they're alive. August 2015. Golden sweet corn rained onto my tray with a salty butter shine. Green beans dipped into their shallow pool of chicken broth, garlic, diced onion, and bacon. The beans made their presence known with a mouth-watering steam. A mound of potatoes plopped onto the tray and was pressed into a caldera with the back end of the cook's spoon. The divot was filled till it overflowed with a heavenly brown gravy. Last came the pork. A pork with the tenderness of a pudding and the taste of Hawaiian basted honey. Each cut of meat was so fresh it caused rumors that the meat was butchered in the kitchen. I believed them too. Lunch was the best part of St. Jude Catholic School. Unfortunately, it was followed by the worst. Once our bellies were stuffed to the brim, we were banished to the schoolyard for recess. Fresh-cut grass poisoned the air. Summer still burned at the beginning of the school year, and the sun blasted a bright sting to the back of my eyes. The day wasn't made for me. My days were when it rained, and we could go to the library to enjoy the silence while the talking boys released their energy into the gym. But days like this were ruled by the talking boys. They squealed and screeched as kickballs and wiffle balls torpedoed through the air. The other girls that weren't interested in joining the boys usually huddled by the school building telling jokes and updating each other on the latest gossip. I would listen with my back to them. Whenever I heard something especially juicy, I would sign my response close to my chest so they didn't see. I wished I could turn and share all of the gossip I overheard, the benefits of not being noticed. I knew Darren found his dad's booze and planned to bring a bottle to school that week. I knew Bianca got into it with her mum the night before because she was failing math. I imagined they would get a kick out of that. Maybe they'd even be my friend if they understood me, but they wouldn't. No one would. The schoolyard became unusually quiet. A group of boys huddled at the fence that separated us from the woods. What they saw captured their attention and sewed their mouths shut, at least until they scurried away to giggle in small groups. Not all of them were so amused with the subject beyond the fence. Most looked confused, but some even looked concerned. Piece by piece, the huddle of children broke back into their daily play until I could get a peek at what it was they were so interested in. On the other side of the fence, crouched beneath the shadows of the woods, was a boy. He looked each boy in the eye when he asked them to play. It felt like a plea, a desperate attempt to find a friend. The boys didn't care, though. How could they? The boy in the woods spoke in a tongue they didn't understand. Like me, he spoke with no tongue at all. It was a lonely way to speak in this school. Alone was a hard place to be in 8th grade. After seeing him, I felt we could be there together. When the last boy peeled away, I walked to the fence. With each step, I felt more emboldened, more hopeful to finally have a friend. I can't talk to you, I need normal friends. The words echoed from moments I had the same urge in the past. but this time had to be different. He was like me. He would understand me. "Aren't you contagious, Holly?" I shook my head and tried to keep the past away like a swarm of bees, but they kept stinging. "What are you doing with your hands, weirdo?" "Go away. People will think I'm weird too if you're next to me." "Did God make you broken on purpose?" I was stuck halfway to the fence. All the sounds of the schoolyard vanished behind the words. This was a stupid idea. No one wanted to be my friend. Why did I even walk this far? What a waste. I turned around to go back and pretend I was like the other girls. I wanted to smile when they smiled and laughed when they laughed without the embarrassment of having them see me, but my mum's voice cut through the swarm. "She's just shy." I knew she wasn't our supervisor that day. The girls wouldn't have talked quite as loud and the boys wouldn't have played quite as hard if she was. Chipper, as the other kids called her in whispers, held the reputation of a drill sergeant when she wore the habit. The type of nun to crack a ruler across your knuckles if you misbehaved during her prime years. Though, the main reason she earned the brand Chipper was the small chip missing from her front tooth. "She's just shy," her voice replayed in my head. Her catchphrase when anyone asked about me. "Why doesn't she talk? She's just shy. What happened to her? She's just shy." It was a simpler explanation than the truth, a less shameful statement than the truth. I was born like this. But I'm not shy, or at least I refused to be. I closed my eyes and took a first step towards the boy. The yard got a little quieter as the other kids vacated the area around the boy in the woods. When I felt the beating sun disappear behind the shade of the trees, I stopped and waited for a moment. "I'm not shy," I thought to myself, but before I had the courage to open my eyes, the fence rattled. The clatter of the chain-linked fence stopped with the stomp of feet meeting the ground. Step by step he came closer until I heard his heavy, phlegm-rattled breath just in front of me. With one final reassurance, I opened my eyes. Immediately I knew why the other kids avoided him. He was big, much bigger than the other boys in our grade. Most of the boys were just sprouting the first seedlings of hair on their forearm, while his forearms were already coated. A leather canteen dangled from his belt. His chest and shoulders stood at my eye level and were noticeably broad even under his tattered grey jacket. Hair even started to sprout on his neck just below his white mask, a detail I hadn't noticed across the yard. An elephant mask made cheap and pressed to his face with a single elastic string that ran in an eroded divot around his head before it vanished into the cave of his grey jacket's hood. In the centre, where the trunk should be, was only a hole. The jagged edges of the plastic hole encircled a void too deep to see any detail of his face through. My breath stuttered. This person could hurt me, or take me, or do anything else he wanted, and I would be helpless. I could scream at the top of my lungs for help, but only a strained whine from my over-tightened vocal cords would escape. No one would hear that. Hell, I wasn't even sure he would hear it. I knew my only option was to run, but when I took a glance behind me to plan my escape, he raised his hand. He exposed the dry, calloused skin of his palm to me. It stayed suspended in the air for a moment before he slowly brought the tips of his fingers towards me. Gently, they landed on my throat. Each of his 5 fingerprints carefully scraped up and down. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't get my hands to move. I tried to get something to escape my mouth, but I only felt my throat strain under his touch. Finally, he removed his hand and signed a single word. A word that I hadn't heard anyone say to me, a word that turned off all the alarms blaring in my head. "Beautiful," he signed. October 2023. The pond was no wider than 12 feet and smelled like frankincense and sweet licorice. Grass around the pond grew high and hid something on the other side of the water. Between tufts of grass, a smoky grey shape laid still on the ground. I thought it was a discarded fur coat until I noticed its 2 beady eyes fixated on me from its white cone-shaped head. "What is that, Holly?" Abigail asked. I loved the sound of her voice, the way it stumbled from one note to the next without guidance. She only used it when we were alone, so I knew her brother already ventured beyond earshot. Still, it was conflicting. While I loved our secret, it was too wonderful to not be shared, something she stiffly refused to do. "I think it is an opossum," I signed. "Geez. Do you think it's sick? Should we help it?" Abigail asked. Her hands anxiously scratched at her jeans. "Maybe it is just playing dead," I signed. As if on cue, a crow landed just behind the opossum's head and disappeared behind the grass. When the crow's head resurfaced, it did with a string of red, slick entrails. It clapped its beak around the guts until it cut a bite out and let the rest flop back to the ground. Abigail's lip turned in a shocked disgust. "Method," I signed. Abigail gave me a jab from her elbow and a laugh, the most wonderful secret of all. "Holly, you two are supposed to stay close. Get Abigail and follow the sound." Abigail's older brother, Lucas, called before a metallic rattle screeched through the air. He was about 23, 2 years older than Abigail and I. He wouldn't get any older if he kept up the racket. Abigail watched the annoyance on my face and waited for me to relay the message. "Your brother is being an idiot." I signed to her before I held her hand. We rushed through the woods to Lucas. As we ran, I kept thinking about the opossum. Even after the crow ripped at its entrails, I swore it blinked. When we emerged from the woods, Lucas had the chain-link fence clutched in both of his fists and was shaking it rapidly. He only stopped when I hit him with a swift slap to the shoulder. "Hey, what the hell?" he said. "You know this is illegal, right? Are you trying to get caught?" I signed. He glanced at Abigail briefly, who was focused on our lips. "By who?" "No one is here. Are the birds going to rat us out? Or maybe the squirrels?" He said and signed. For the first time in years, I looked beyond the chain-linked fence. Across the overgrown schoolyard was the husk that was once called St. Jude Catholic School. As a kid, I always thought the school was shaped like a stale, square bagel. A barren courtyard of a hole was encircled by the depressing corridors and classrooms. It was divided into 4 sections, each with their own special landmarks. The south side had the main entrance. The east section had the cafeteria and library. The west section had the pool and gymnasium, and the north, the section we were facing, had the theatre. A tiny access door peeked over the edge of the theatre's roof like a timid child. After the incident, the school tried to reassure the parents by hefty investments in security. All glass was reinforced and every window was fortified with steel bars, but it was too little too late. The parents and their precious tuition money already migrated with their kids to the rival Catholic school upstate. St. Jude was left to succumb to the vines and weather. The corpse looked more like an abandoned prison than a school. "Or maybe the rats will," Lucas whispered. The thought made my spine wriggle. "I hope whatever you're looking for is worth it," Lucas said as he stomped a path for us through the waist-high grass. We walked around the school building to get to the entrance. At the entrance was a figure. It sat against the front door, cloaked in a grey jacket. I felt every muscle in my body constrict at once. Abigail turned to ask what was wrong, and all I could do was gesture towards the figure. She immediately tapped Lucas on the shoulder to point his attention towards the mysterious man. The figure eased itself to its feet when it saw us. It waved, a wild wave with arms flapping like the tube men at car dealerships. Then he dropped his hood. To my relief, there was no mask, only a face, a boyish face. A face I had never seen before, and judging by the look on Abigail's, she hadn't either. Lucas turned to us with an eye roll and motioned us to the boy. He couldn't have been older than 16. His brunette hair waved chaotically at the top of his beanpole body. His skin was still plagued with the red specks of puberty, and atop his lip was his most prized possession, a crown of 10 scraggly hairs. "Lucas, ladies," he said with all the charm a boy drowning in supermarket cologne could muster. Abigail took the hearing aids from her ears and stowed them away in her pocket. "They don't even help that much," she would say if I asked why, but I knew that wasn't true. I stopped asking and just assured her with a touch on the back. "Stevie, where's your brother?" Lucas shot at the kid. "He got called into work tonight, but don't worry. I'll get us through safe. I'm like the outdoor boys of buildings," Stevie said. "I don't see the gear." "Your brother was supposed to bring the gear," Lucas asked. "Hey, who needs it anyway? It can't be that hard," Stevie proclaimed. Lucas pinched the exhaustion from his brow. "You have your license?" Lucas asked. "I got it a couple months ago. Thank you for asking." "Then drive home," Lucas said. He put a shoulder to the door. "I can't!" Lucas heaved the metal door open with a creak, followed by the clatter of aluminum cans on the concrete stoop. "I've been drinking," Stevie finished. The smell of stagnant, musty water filled the building. Puddles spotted the tile floor and grew with a rhythmic drip. The entryway ran perpendicular to the south section hallway. At their intersection was a trophy case with only smashed glass to show. The last couple of weeks before the school closed were a blur. Teachers at first tried to maintain the illusion of safety, but as the halls grew more and more empty, they gave up the act. Everyone was scared except for me. I just went through the motions, a passenger in my own body. As I re-entered the remains of the school, I could only wonder if it really was worth it. Where had I even had it last? Maybe my locker? It was as good a place to check first as any. I just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. I wasn't a passenger anymore. I felt the fear. "What are you thinking?" Abigail signed to me as we walked down the hallway. She always seemed to know the answer. She read plain as day on my face. Still, she wanted to know what I would say. It is just like I remember. I signed to her with a smile. As we passed locker after locker, I noticed that each one had a dent, a softball-sized dent near the latch that left them ajar by the thinnest crack. The further we went, the more I noticed a splotch or a smear of brown-stained blood in the dents. When we turned the corner to the east section, when I heard a rattle come from behind us, I snapped my head around to see nothing besides the damp floor tiles and busted lockers we'd passed since we turned the corner. "Right, ladies!" Stevie shouted before he spun around to look at us while he walked backwards. To that moment, I almost forgot he and Lucas were blubbering to each other ahead of us. He waited for a response while the alcohol that sloshed around in his pinky-thin body made him forget his land legs. Had they heard the rattle too? "Did he say something?" Abigail signed to me. Stevie was zapped into a panic. He blocked his mouth from our sight. "Dude, you can't bring deaf people. They're gonna get hurt. What the hell is wrong with you?" he said to Lucas, who jabbed him in the ribs with his elbow. "Holly's mute, you dipshit. She can hear you." Stevie gathered his wind in a breath before giving a silent, bewildered chuckle to himself. He lagged behind Lucas to get out of his sight. He then raised his hand and mimed like he held something pointed directly at me. Then he popped his thumb down like he pressed the mute button on a TV remote. He winked and turned to catch up to Lucas. "She's just shy." My mother's voice echoed again. After the incident, I learned not to argue with it. Abigail tugged on my shirt sleeve and pointed to the locker beside us. "It ends," she signed. Like the others before it, it was dented and stained in blood, but each locker beyond it was strangely left untouched. Even stranger, this locker was mine. I opened it. "Did you find what you're looking for?" Lucas asked. But all that was in my locker were chilling words smeared in blood on the back wall that read, "You promised." I sprinted as fast as I could back the way we came. I cut around the corner, flew through the lobby and smashed my weight against the push bar on the door, but it didn't budge. The doors were locked. A metal chain knotted around the door, sealed shut with a padlock. May 2016. Shelley was behind by the length of a grass blade, and the finish line twig was only a couple inches away. It was still anyone's race. Rain washed the schoolyard that morning. The smell of potting soil leaked from the bags stacked between the garden shed and the schoolyard fence. A colony of snails slid on the bags, ready to be drafted into the snail race. Mine was always named Shelley, as it always was. I thought of it like the lead in a Broadway play. Though they're each their own actress, they all wanted to be Shelley. Trunkless didn't give names to his snails. He never gave me his name either. So in my mind he became Trunkless for the hole in his elephant mask. It was fitting enough. Trunkless never gave his snails a name either. Instead, he gave them a crack. When he found a snail he liked for the day, he popped a slit into the shell with his thumbnail. It was as casual to him as shaking a hand. The ease with which he split their shells made me nauseous. When we first started racing snails, I asked him why he did it, but the answer was simple. Like the hole in his elephant mask and splits in his knuckles, he just liked them better broken, like us. After many snail races, we developed a system. We took turns clapping for our snails, usually in two. I would clap twice. He would clap twice. It was a brilliant idea in concept. Chaperones would only hear the continuous claps of one kid, but we never got the timing right in practice. The awkward pause between our claps was hilariously obvious even after a full year of trying. We stopped trying to make it convincing, and it became only a silly tradition while we watched the snails run their foot-long marathon. I often got more consumed in the rhythm than the race itself. "Look," he signed. I came up with the idea of picking a juicy tomato slice off of my lunch sandwich and stowing it in my pocket to use as motivation beyond the finish line twig. As disappointing as it was to devolve my BLT into a BL, it was proving worth it. Not only were both snails participating, but it was a nail-biter. Shelley surged into the lead with only an inch to go. I clapped and waved her forward frantically. He did the same for his snail that started to slip behind, but it was too late. Shelley slipped over the twig to take gold by the thinnest of margins. I jumped up and applauded for the whole yard to hear at the peak athleticism on display. I bent down to get a look at the little Olympian as she climbed onto her delicious red prize. Squelch! In an instant, Shelley and the tomato were beneath the stubby heel of a black leather shoe. My mother's shoe. I looked up her habit to see her face. I was shocked to see she didn't seem angry in the slightest. Her cheeks were flushed with fear. She snatched me by the arm in a vice grip. Her fingertips dug into my skin deep enough to bruise, but still I tried to fight it. I knew we would be forbidden from going behind the garden shed. With no other place to hide in the open schoolyard, I didn't think I'd ever see him again. That meant no more snail races, no more picking honeysuckles from the bush that grew through the fence, no more friends. I would be back to being an outcast, the quiet kid that no one understood, the broken girl. So I kept fighting, which only made my mum's grip tighter. She blew the whistle around her neck. "Everyone get inside now, get inside," she screamed. I fought until I was pulled back into the school building and the door slammed shut behind us. The only person that brought me any joy was sealed behind it. The school felt like it was on lockdown for the rest of the day. Nuns monitored the halls between classes, and no one was allowed to use the restroom without an adult escort. When the day came to an end, I laid on the bleachers by the pool. It was an indoor pool attached to the gymnasium by a single set of double doors. The stinging stench of chlorine cleansed my soul after a particularly taxing day. After-school events were cancelled that afternoon, so there was no splashing from the swim team or shrill tennis shoe chirps from the gym. It was just me and the soothing hum of the pool jets. I spent most of the time looking up through the sunroof. Clouds, birds, and airplanes eased in and out of the glass frame. If I wasn't looking at the sky, I admired the abomination on the wall. A mural, painted with the artistic vision of a blind ape, stained the pearlescent white paint. I assumed it was supposed to be a collage of professional swimmers, but I only thought that because the centermost figure had a vague resemblance to a picture of Michael Phelps I saw once. "What are you still doing here?" a creaky voice called from the doorway to the gymnasium. A janitor with a spindly grey beard and age-spotted scalp hunched over his trach bin on wheels like a walker. He wasn't any of the regular janitors I saw throughout the school day. He must have been part of the evening crew. "What time is it?" I signed, but he kept glaring at me. Of course he didn't understand. I could practically hear the accusations banging around in his head. I threw my hands up and walked past him. I heard the squeak of his trash bin trailing behind me through my walk of shame to the main entrance. "I know your face, little girl," he spat as I swung the door open. The front of the school was empty. Aside from the occasional bird song, it was silent. It was a sticky heat with the smell of rain starting to roll in. Stepped out and walked around the building to the parking lot. The lot was empty aside from one car. My mother's. Was she waiting on me? The thought of making her wait this long made me dread getting in the car to receive my scolding. As I stepped into the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the schoolyard. It was trunkless with his canteen at his hip. He waved me to come towards him. "I have to show you something," he signed. I was ecstatic. All day I thought I may never get to see my friend again. Without hesitation, I hopped the fence and went to him. "Where is it?" I signed. "Just behind the garden shed, but you have to promise me something." "Anything," I signed with a smile. "You cannot tell anyone about this." I hesitated, but promised with a smile. He nodded and popped the cap off of his canteen. Then he led me behind the shed. October 2023. "What the fuck, dude? You all gotta stop fucking with me, man. This isn't funny," Stevie whined. I was in disbelief. We were just there. We opened the door only a few minutes ago, and in that small amount of time, we were chained in. I held the padlock against my palm. It was warm. Someone locked us in. He locked us in. The thought made my head spin as it wrapped around the danger we were in. Abigail's touched my shoulder. "Is there another way out of here?" She signed. I swallowed the sick feeling when I saw her and kept it down long enough to think. Each of the three other sections had at least one exit. The cafeteria and library in the east section each had one. The theatre in the north section had one, and the pool and gymnasium in the west section had one each. I stood and turned to the group. Lucas racked his brain for some kind of plan. Stevie paced and swore to God that he'd quit drinking if he got out of there in one piece. I signed to Abigail and Lucas about the other exits. Stevie was desperate to know, but Lucas only told him to follow. We crept back down the hall. Lucas led the pack with Abigail and I behind him. Each of us kept a careful eye on each door we passed. Stevie stayed behind us as he was told and kept his mind occupied by tightrope walking a strip of blue tile on the floor. It wasn't a helpful task, but anything to keep his mouth shut was useful to me. Lucas peeked through the slim glass window on the first classroom door beyond my locker and winced away from it. He looked back at Abigail and I and shook his head. I couldn't resist, though. I cupped my hands over my eyes and looked in. The rat's paw scratched at the tile floor. Not a desperate scratch, but an unfolding and refolding of its paws to a steady rhythm. The tile just seemed to get in the way of its claws. Blood stained the corners of the rat's mouth. Its ear flicked away the horde of flies, convinced of its death, and they should have been right. The rat was severed in half. The open wound spilled the animal's entrails into a hole behind it. All that jutted from the hole was a bear trap's exposed metal teeth in a crimson-stained grin. Despite the grisly sight and the unmistakable scent of death oozing from beneath the door, I couldn't look away from Rat's paw, its distress signal. I wanted to put it out of its misery immediately. The suffering was the worst part. I mustered the courage to bury my nose and do it, but just before I turned the doorknob, SNAP. A piercing scream came from behind me. Stevie's foot was gone. It broke through a brittle blue tile on the floor and sunk its teeth into the boy's shin, so deep it could taste the marrow. The iron scent of blood erupted from the hole. Stevie gripped his calf with white knuckles and screamed hard enough to slice his vocal cords to ribbons, but even over the screams I could hear something. The sound echoed from the school's entrance and ricocheted to me from around the corner. Thick, deliberate footsteps. I dropped to my knees at the hole and tried to pry the trap open. Once I saw a gap in the trap's jaws. My hand slipped in Stevie's blood, and it snapped shut on the wound, sending another scream through his throat. Still, the footsteps got closer, until a figure turned the corner. The white elephant mask with a missing trunk was still strapped to his face. He stood as tall as the door frames. His chest was as broad as a truck grill. With the force of a buffalo, he charged directly at us. The same leather canteen swung violently at his hip. I yanked the trap again and again. I didn't care if I had to work the trap's jaws until it chewed Stevie's foot off. He had to get free. We had to get out of there. Abigail tugged at my shirt and screamed with terrified tears streaking down her cheeks. The monster of a man was only a few feet from us when Lucas grabbed my shirt and slung me away from Stevie's leg. By the time I got to my feet, Trunkless was standing right behind the boy, the black eye slits in the mask aimed right at me. He raised his hand in the air and waved a subtle hello. I was frozen. Everyone, even Stevie, was still for an instant. Trunkless was the first to move. He gently wrapped his hand around the side of Stevie's head and gouged space for his middle finger into his eye socket. Stevie squealed for him to stop, but all the begging did was give him an opening to stuff the mouth of the canteen in. He dumped the liquid down Stevie's throat, then jerked it back out. As Stevie coughed and sputtered, the man wrapped his fingers around Stevie's bottom teeth and strained as he pulled on the mandible. "We have to go." Lucas yanked me out of my paralysis and we sprinted down the hallway through the muffled pleading of Stevie and dipped into the first doorway that didn't seem like a classroom. But before we could close the door, the shrill screams were abruptly quieted by a pop. I laid sprawled on the floor and ran my hands over the itchy carpet. The scratchy texture was enough to remind me that I could feel, that I was breathing. The ceiling above me was tiled. Some had protruding bellies of water. Most were splotched brown like coffee stains. I counted the stains on beat to the thunderous metronome behind my ribs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Lucas already gathered himself enough to survey the room. His footsteps and the rattle of chained exit doors were the only sounds. I pinched my eyes shut and took a deep breath before I sat up to look around. Computers were spaced out on 2 long tables in the far corner of the room, just expensive dust collectors without power. A cluster of organized tables and chairs stood close by. The rest of the room was books. Aisles and aisles of sturdy wooden bookshelf, each stuffed with the bane of the school's former attendees, all of which had acquired the pleasing smell of aged paper. There was an indention in the carpet at the end of the nearest aisle, the distinct print of a bookshelf where there wasn't one to be found. Lucas chuckled like he'd figured out the punchline to an unfunny prank. "He waved at you," he said. I didn't have to look at him. I could feel his burning eyes on me. "Fist your locker, and now he waves at you." I didn't know. I signed. I tried to suck the tears back, but they already started to pool. "Who is he? I'm sure you know that, don't you?" he snarled. I could only glance at him. His anger burned, but his quivering lips showed that the fire was fueled by fear. I couldn't say anything. Of course, I had no idea he would be here, but if I told them who he was, would they leave me? The only other friend I ever had was stalking the halls covered in a kid's blood. I would be alone again. Such an awful place. "You convinced us to come here. You wanted to get something and you sure as shit got it, didn't you? What did we do to deserve this, Holly?" I shook my head violently to dodge his accusation. The pools in my eyes overflowed before Abigail saw what was happening and jumped between us. "Lucas, we are stuck here. All 3 of us, and if we want to get out, we can't be an asshole. We need some trust, okay?" Abigail signed to him. Lucas swallowed some of his hatred and thought. His sister was always his soft spot. "Okay, but she needs to give me a reason to." He looked past Abigail and back at me. "Why are we here?" he asked. The truth sounded so absurd now. I'm supposed to tell them I got us locked in with a murderer and got a boy killed over a dumb class project from over a decade ago. I couldn't make my hands say anything. "She's just shy." My mother's words echoed in my head, the only words I remember her saying. Lucas scoffed and walked away from us. Abigail sat next to me and rested her shoulder and head against mine. "I'm sorry about him." "You don't really know that monster, do you?" she signed. I wanted to tell her everything. I always wanted to tell her everything, but I couldn't shake the knot of dread that formed in my stomach at the thought of doing so. Alone, such an awful place. I didn't know, was all I could sign. "I'm here," she repeated to me in a calming whisper. "Holly, get Abigail and come here," Lucas demanded. I composed myself the best I could and brought Abigail over. Lucas was standing at an open door. What was on the other side of the door was too dark to be an exit, far too dark. Just enough moonlight came through the windows of the library to see stairs leading down. The concrete stairs ended abruptly at a waterline so calm it could have been mistaken as frozen. We were concerned at first, but realized whatever microscopic horrors swam around in the flooded basement were nothing compared to the one lurking in the halls. Abigail went down first. She kept her hearing aids in a tight fist above her head and used her other hand to grab Lucas's. He then offered his free hand to me. I hesitated. "Trust," he said. The word made me nauseous, but I took his hand and covered our tracks by closing the door behind us. The water swallowed us from feet to navel. Darkness was all around us. All of my existence was a frigid chill soaked up through my spine. The sloshing of legs and Lucas's grip around my wrist, all I could do was follow his pull. I fluttered my free hand through the air to find some clue as to where we were until it collided with a massive tank. It rang a hollow twang after my knuckle blindly hit it. Lucas gave my arm a stern jerk, and at the same time, something coiled around my foot and tripped. I thrashed my arms beneath the water to keep my head from submerging beneath the disease-festered water. Once I regained my balance, I kicked the thing that tripped me into my hand. With the all-consuming darkness taking my vision, I ran my fingers over it to learn what it was. The unmoving serpentine shape ended in an open mouth with rivets for lips. A hose, I realized. I also realized that I wasn't being pulled anymore. There were no fingers wrapped around my wrist. Lucas let go. Hinges squealed from further inside the room and ended with a door closed. My first instinct was to splash, to shoot my audio flare for rescue, but just as I raised my arms I heard something else. 2 claps. I knew it wasn't them. The sound was too thick, too expecting. Trunkless waited for me to fill in my part. I stayed silent. My feet were anchored to the floor, and I hoped that Abigail and Lucas did the same, wherever they were. Something stepped into the water and I pinched every muscle in my face to keep a yelp from escaping. The water stilled after a moment. Clap, clap. My nerves prodded every muscle in my body to flee. My resolve was failing, but before it completely caved, I escaped in thought. I thought of Abigail and I finding a way out of this school. I thought of leaving this place in a cloud of dust behind our tires and going to a concert. Abigail loved concerts. The crowd pounded the beat into the ground. The speakers blasted the music until it rattled in her chest. The sound was all-encompassing, to the point that even without ears, she could hear it. I imagined dancing with her in the crowd. It was one of the places we felt included, like the world was made to fit us in, like I wasn't alone. Clap, clap. The sound snapped me out of thought with a boom to my eardrum. I shrieked and tried to run, but his hands quickly crushed my upper arm. He dragged me behind him through the water. I struggled to get my mouth above the water for air. Drowning became my biggest worry until I heard the thud of his boot hit a stair through the splashes. He hoisted me out of the water like I weighed nothing. The hinges squealed again, and just before he threw me into the unknown, caught a glimpse of Lucas as he pulled Abigail back into the moonlit library.